Morning, Megan. Morning, Chris. This morning we're seeing evidence that Russia's full-scale assault on Ukraine is intensifying.
It was unprovoked, but this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine.
In the capital of Ukraine, the sound of missile strikes and air sirens.
After days on a razor's edge, Ukraine is now a nation at war.
Chances are you have never lived through a war where one country invades another with the intention of expanding its borders. There have been numerous smaller wars, like the US and their war in Afghanistan, but that was to eliminate terrorism. With this war, though, no one is really sure what Putin's end goal is. To first understand the conflict, we need to go back about 31 years. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the western part of the country split into 15 independent countries, one of them being Ukraine. In 1991, the newly formed Russian Federation selected Boris Yeltsin to be the first president of the newly formed country. Prior to 1991, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and had Soviet nuclear weapons in its territory. And after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine held about 1/3 of the Soviet nuclear arsenal, third largest in the world at the time. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to destroy the weapons and joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russian forces withdrew nuclear weapons and delivery systems from the Crimean Peninsula, which was part of Ukraine. In 1999, after mounting pressure, Boris Yeltsin resigned, choosing his successor, Vladimir Putin, who had been serving as prime minister. Putin was born to a working-class family in Leningrad in 1952. An only child, he grew up in a Soviet-style communal apartment with two other families, as was typical at the time. Putin grew up loving spy novels and TV shows. While in school, he went to the KGB Security and Intelligence Agency and asked how he could join, where he was told to work hard and study law. This is exactly what he did. Vladimir Putin joined the KGB, the Russian Secret Services, in the 1970s. After serving for 15 years as a foreign intelligence officer and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, he began his political career in Moscow in 1996. Putin, who did not come from an intellectual family, believed what they were told about the USSR's superpower success and did not question propaganda or want what they did not have. Putin is known for his nationalism and patriotism, which have bled over into his political career. In Moscow, he quickly climbed the ladder of the newly formed FSB, the agency that succeeded the KGB. When Boris Yeltsin stepped down in 1999, Putin took over as active president on New Year's Eve, then winning the election in March 2000. During Putin's first tenure as president, he grew the Russian economy by 7% each year, and after serving his 2 4-year terms as president, he stepped down to prime minister in accordance with the Russian constitution. As prime minister, he oversaw the military reform and police reform. Re-elected to president for his 3rd term, he annexed the Crimean Peninsula, shown here. This caused tension between the two countries, which only escalated in the coming years. That brings us to what caused the conflict. When the Soviet Union dissolved, Putin claimed that this is the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. Putin, who is very patriotic and grew up in the Soviet Union, it is believed that his goal before he leaves is to establish part of the Soviet Union again. In 2013, protests in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to reject a deal for greater economic integration with the European Union, which was heavily influenced by Putin, were met with a violent crackdown by state security forces. And since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine has started to lean towards the West and made attempts to join the EU and NATO. Putin has claimed that Russian and Ukrainians are one people, denying Ukraine its long history. Putin has longed for Ukraine to remain neutral and has warned against NATO expanding further eastward towards its borders. The tension between the two countries has been escalating for many years, reaching new heights in 2021. Following the annexation of Crimea, the Donbas region of Ukraine became gripped by pro-Russian and anti-government unrest, seizing parts of the southeast region. In January 2021, President Vladimir Zelensky made an attempt to join NATO, which led Putin to amass his forces on the Ukrainian border. Tension was at an all-time high. This tension eased until late 2021. December 2021, Ukraine's defense minister claimed a buildup of about 90,000 Russian soldiers near the rebel-controlled areas in Ukraine's east. This raised many flags among the Western powers. It now appeared that Russia was ready to use force to obtain their goals. Tension eased until February. Russia was still building up its forces, but Putin often repeated that they had no intent to invade Ukraine. In early February 2022, the UK, US, and their allies sanctioned Russian parliament members, banks, and other assets, with the US then cutting Russia from the SWIFT banking system. Not to mention that the Russian ruble fell to under 1 US cent. In February, Russia began military drills in Ukraine neighboring Belarus. Tension began to rise again, and on February 24, 2022, the Russian Federation launched a full-fledged war on Ukraine, aiming to demilitarize and denazify the country. Putin addressed the Russian people, claiming the invasion as a special military operation that is aimed to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people. The initial days of the war exploded the Kremlin's plan to mount a blitzkrieg. The Russians aimed for a speedy takeover of Kyiv, southern Ukraine, and the left bank Ukraine, but met stiff resistance. Russian troops began their march towards the capital Kyiv that involved a 40-mile convoy of Russian tanks, which was quickly destroyed by the Ukrainians. On March 2nd, the UN condemns the Russian invasion, and Kherson in southern Ukraine is the first city to fall to Russian control. Then on March 8th, the US bans all imports of Russian energy and other global brands like McDonald's, Visa, MasterCard, Starbucks, and many others suspend operations in Russia. There have been ceasefire talks, but none have made much progress, as Russia continues to demand that Ukraine never join NATO, something they are refusing to give into. As Russian forces entered the suburbs of Kyiv, they were met with stiff resistance and were never able to gain control of key points in the capital city. The Russian war machine has experienced many logistical problems during the war, which has slowed the progress of the invasion and resulted in many Russian casualties. And I'm sure you've all seen the viral video of a Ukrainian farmer towing an abandoned Russian tank, or the countless videos of Ukrainian people heckling Russian forces. On March 29th, after failing to take the capital, Russia began withdrawing troops from Kyiv and turned their attention to the east, where they were having more success. This goes to show the will of the Ukrainian people to defend their homes, as a large majority of the people fighting are everyday civilians. The world has been well aware that Russia has been targeting civilians, which are considered war crimes, but then the world really got a glimpse to what the Ukrainian people have went through during the war. On April 1st, the massacre of Bucha was unveiled to the world. Images have emerged of countless bodies lying in the streets. This an eye-opener to such a barbaric war the Russians have chosen. Russian forces have been suffering heavy casualties since the beginning of the invasion, but through all the bad, there has been some good. In the northern suburbs of Kyiv and some northern territory, Ukrainian forces have made progress in launching counterattacks and taking back the territory seized by the Russians, and hope to take back the city of Kherson as Russian forces continue their withdrawal. In Russia, the invasion has been met with lots of backlash, but Putin has resorted to heavily filtering media within the country and arresting anyone who speaks out against the invasion. The sanctions imposed by the West are having devastating effects on the citizens of Russia. An example is when the Russian ruble fell to below 1 cent and Russian banks were only letting people withdraw $20. Ukraine has received lots of support from the West since the beginning of the war, mostly from NATO countries. So, if Ukraine has been receiving support from NATO countries, why hasn't it been allowed to join? Well, in short, if Ukraine could join NATO, that would mean that the war would become an issue for all of NATO's countries. This would mean that Ukraine would gain the support of NATO, but they would be forced to defend their territory, plunging us into another world war. Russia has threatened the potential of nuclear war if any other countries interfere. Instead of this, countries of NATO and many others have resorted to sending much-needed supplies, including military equipment, vehicles, food, and other resources needed to support the Ukrainian army and the people. Putin believed that the war would crumple the declining Western alliances, but what has it done? Western alliances have grown in strength and have become even more united. This war is far from over, and Ukraine is still in desperate need of supplies. That's where you come in. You can donate to the UNHCR, which provides humanitarian support to Ukraine, like food, clean water, and shelter to countless civilians who are now homeless. You can also stop purchasing Russian-made products. Over the past couple of days, the Ukrainian army has made significant gains in recapturing territory, and most recently, Russia has been removed from the Human Rights Council. This has put the question on the minds of the people in the West. Maybe Russia isn't the global superpower we made them out to be.